What I keep being too caught up by all my demons, lost without that love.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another edition of On the Line Life Stories, where I speak to some incredible individuals who are related to Aston Villa in some manner about their life stories. And today I'm joined by, I can't believe I'm saying this, former Aston Villa manager and player, Bryan Little. Bryan, I can't believe I've got you on. How are you during these tough times?
I think I could finish the whole program if I went through how everything is. Yeah, it's really strange. I mean, not only for myself, but I'm an older father. I've got two teenage boys at home. I have a young daughter at home. I'm 67. I'm just not used to things like this, so it's crazy. My wife works full time at school, so I'm left to sort of run the house, which is not very easy for me, to be honest. So yeah, I mean, do it with a smile and the occasional grumble, but yeah, we get through. It's but it is quite unique. But I've got a great family around me, so that keeps me going, really.
Because I imagine as well, being a former footballer, former manager, that element of being sociable and you're around lots and lots of people day by day. Do you think bear in mind that you've got a large family now, has that helped you through this period, talking to them and just communicating with them?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm used to, walking into a football club and just speaking to everybody I see, and I'm used to going out and talking to supporters associations. And yeah, I think I think sometimes when you do something and it's a natural thing to do and you've done it for years and years, it just becomes matter of fact. But then when it's disappeared, you actually realise how much you missed. And I still occasionally goes down to Villa Park and watch some of the games, and I do the commentary sometimes for the club. And it's really eerie. It's quite strange to walk into Villa Park and not speak to people. I mean, and I miss all my friends. The lads from the European Cup winning team. Just going down and knowing I'd see them and have a chat to them. And yeah, it's really quite bizarre. It's not enjoyable, and that side of life is something that I've become very used to, talking to people and enjoying people's company. So it gets a bit, in the house, it gets a bit fraught at times. I mean, having two teenagers who all they want to do is go out, I mean, my 19-year-old, he keeps saying to me, I've not been out for a year. What's going on? I can't go anywhere. All he wants to do is go down the pub with his mates. And the younger one, who should be taking A levels now, again, he's at a complete loss. So it's unbelievably strange. And at my age, to have gone 67 years, having done pretty much what you've wanted all your life, it is bizarre. But yeah, we get by. It is really strange. But I do miss the interaction with football fans, home and away. And it's a really strange time for someone like myself who loves meeting people, really.
You joined Aston Villa back in 1969. So looking back now during this lockdown period, how do you process the fact that you've been affiliated with a club for so long and have such a good bond with them and the fan base?
Well, I'm blessed, aren't I, really? I mean, I'm blessed in many ways. I still very much occasionally reflect on being that 15-year-old lad who walked into the club for the first time with a lad called Roy Stark, who I'd met the day before because I was 15 and I left home and I needed to go in digs with somebody. And I was very fortunate to get in digs with Roy, because Roy was, although the same age as me, he was much more manly than me, grown up before I'd had grown up. And pretty much he took me under his wing and showed me what to do. And but I can still remember walking, catching the bus to Whitten Island, getting off the bus, walking up the road into the entrance in Trinity Road. And I can still remember that as a 15-year-old kid. So to transport myself now, 52 years on, and I'm still going to Villa Park, and I'm, and I've been an apprentice, and I became a football player, and I got injured and I had to retire. So I worked in the club shop. So then I became the youth coach. Then I went off managing. Then I came back as a manager. And then I came back as an informal advisor and a part-time ambassador for the club. I mean, it's just an incredible story, really. And yeah, I think I'm blessed. I think I'm very lucky. I still keep in touch with lads who were apprentices with me. I still keep in touch with ex-players. I still keep in touch with players who played for me while I was a manager. It's been an incredible story. One which, I did an autobiography, a football autobiography last year, but friends of mine have said, you've just scratched the surface with that book. You could do another 5 books or whatever, people who know me well. I don't know what else to say other than I feel blessed. I've been very lucky, and I have a great affection for the club. And I like to think that a lot of people enjoy talking to me about the game and my life and things like that. It's been very lucky. I've been very lucky.
Moving to the West Midlands and joining Aston Villa, did you find that process again quite intimidating, or did you relish these new chances that you had in life?
No, it was hard at first. As I've said, I was lucky to have Roy Stark with me, who became the captain of the youth team, and you could tell he was a leader. I mean, Roy was a leader. But we lived in digs together, and we had some great laughs, because I now that I'm thinking of Roy, I don't know why, but I was always like the landlady's favourite, So, and he was like this big tough lad. So whenever there was any dinner or anything coming, our landlady would come in and always hand the plate to him, or if she handed the plate to me, it was because I'd got a few more chips or whatever. And Roy, after a while, Roy started saying, "Oh no, give that to Brian, to Mrs. Mallard," and she'd go, "No, this is yours, Roy. This is yours." And I used to get spoiled to death. Crazy times, So, but it was hard, and I was very lonely. And in those days, no mobile phones. I'm the son of a miner, so we didn't have very much. So my mum and dad would ring me pretty much on a Sunday afternoon every week to see if I was okay. And it was, I was really difficult. And at 15, I'd left, and I had a girlfriend in the Northeast in those days. And I remember I think I stayed at Villa Park 3 months before I got a trip home. And when I went home and I wanted to see her, I realized how much I'd changed. In 3 months, I was in this man's environment of football, going into a football club with men, training with men every day, being around a really harsh environment back in the late 60s, to be honest. It was a tough game in those days with tough people who didn't have very much, because football wasn't like that in those days. They had football and they loved football. And I realized how much I'd grown up when I went home that time. So, that girlfriend thing finished straight away. And probably that first trip home made me realize how much I was beginning to change and how much I was beginning to grow up and how quickly I was growing up compared to my school friends. And consequently, I never really went home very often. I went home to see my mum and dad. My mum and dad would occasionally get down to Aston Villa to see me. But I very quickly changed and become, with the help of Roy Stark, who I always thank very much, with the help of him, I was beginning to grow up in a man's environment, and so I changed very much. And I settled in quicker than I thought, but initially it was difficult being away from home, definitely. My brother joined me a year later. I have a younger brother. I have an elder sister. So, I was used to having people around me, family that was. So to get away from that. But Roy was great for me. Mr. and Mrs. Mallard, my landlord and landlady, were great fun. They were fantastic to me. So those sort of things all worked out for me. I know lads who in those days changed digs every sort of month or so because they couldn't settle with the people. I lived with Mr. and Mrs. Mallard till I was 21, 15 to 21. I got married when I was 21 and left, but I was with them for 6 years. So they were brilliant with me,
And you mentioned that you didn't grow up around the most opulent of families. So bear in mind that when you went to Aston Villa, was your mindset that you wanted to achieve the best in the game, which you could then give back to your mum and dad? I know you said the money wasn't in football at that time, but you wanted to perform to the highest ability that you could to gain the best amount of money to help them. Yeah.
Well, when I left home, my dad gave me £1.10 and gave me £1.10 and put it in my pocket and said, "There you are, son, get on with it," sort of thing. which, you know, when you think about it, like £1.50 as in today's money. Mind you, I was only on £7 a week anyway, you know, so my first apprentice wage was £7 a week with my digs paid. So we're in a completely different world, you know. We are. I mean, you know, when I think about how things were in the 1950s and 60s when I grew up, the world has changed so far, so much, it's untrue. But in those days, £1.10 was as much as my dad could give me, and I survived. So, you know, it must have been okay. But I remember getting on the train at Durham Station, and all of a sudden I left home. That was it. I'd gone. I'd disappeared, you know. And like you say, you learn to grow up quickly, and that you had to. You know, you either sink or swim. And I was fortunate. I swam and had good people around me, which was a big help.
And the role of an apprentice, of course, that's prevalent now in society within different professions, but not necessarily football, with academies being implemented within in it. So the role of an apprentice, what did that occur for you day by day? Because that's not common around football now, as I said.
No. Typical apprenticeship, you know, back in the old days, we spent more time cleaning the dressing rooms, cleaning boots, sweeping the terracing, burning the rubbish, helping the groundsman. So, and it was tough because, again, you know, it's very old school. You know, we had a fella called Ron Wainwright, who was the kit man, who used to check all of our jobs. And Ron liked a cigarette. So he used to hide cigarette butts behind little cleaning places to make sure they were clean. And if they weren't cleaned, he'd walk in and he'd know where his cigarette end was, and he'd just pick it up and he'd look at everybody and go, clean it all again. And we all had to do our jobs all over again. Wow. It was brilliant. It was brilliant. You know, I say to my boys, I drive them around the twist, because if I see anything on the floor, I mean, my house isn't multi-task. I've got 2 dogs, 3 kids and everything else in there, you know, but if I see something on the floor, I've got to pick it up, because I was, you know, when you were an apprentice, if you saw something and did nothing about it, the danger was everybody was going to have to do their jobs all again. And we were brought up in a really strict environment. And I remember my first full season. At the end of that season, we all had to help the groundsman dig Villa Park up. So we spent the whole 8 weeks summer holiday on Villa Park, digging it up, loading the tractors, no massive machinery in those days to completely relay the Aston Villa, the pitch. But we had a great time because, you know, when we had like lunchtime, there was a chip shop over the corner. The club used to give us some money. We used to go and get fish and chips and sit in the terrace, sit in the Holt end at the back, you know, looking down on the ground. And like dreaming as well. You know, I remember I used to dream then, you know, sitting on the talking to the lads, having a laugh and a joke and thinking about playing on that pitch. And it's just a completely different way to be brought up. So our dreams weren't fulfilled in many ways. They were simply dreams, but cleaning the terrace and cleaning I cleaned Bruce Rioch boots, you know, and Bruce Rioch and Pat McMahon were I was their boot boy. So they were my special. I had to look after them 2 more than anything else. We generally cleaned all sorts of boots every day, but on a match day, if Bruce or Pat McMahon wanted anything, it was my job to make sure the boots were right. And it you know, when your player played well, you felt well. I remember Pat gave me £5 at Christmas one year. You know, it's like a week's wages for cleaning his boots throughout the year. He just felt brilliant. You know, it was, oh, wow, look what he's given. And like, you know, it's a completely different world to what it is today. I wouldn't change it for anything, but you learn to love things about and cleaning the place. It like give you a sense of being there, you know, and my background says I actually enjoyed doing the rubbish down the back of the Whitton Lane. You know, you got out a few other jobs at some ways, you know, you'd spend hours burning all the rubbish and keeping out of the way. There was loads of little things that we could do to make ourselves laugh. We had a great time. We had some great friends. You know, there was a mixture of Scottish lads and English. We had a 50-50 mix of English and Scottish lads when I was apprentice. And funnily enough, I sent a video message to a lad called Alex McMillan, who was apprentice with me in 69, 70, who now has just retired from Rolls-Royce up in Edinburgh. And I'd not spoken to him for all these years, but I got a message of somebody, would I send a message? So that was brilliant, to still keep in touch with, to speak to him. I still keep in touch with Bobby Glaze, who's a friend of mine who lives in the Black Country in Dudley. And Bob and I, we still, this last year, we haven't been able to do it, but we would meet at IKEA and have a cup of coffee every sort of now and again. We still do, if we could do it tomorrow, we'd do it. In fact, Bobby will message me, because I know he'll see this and he'll go, I can't wait to go to IKEA for a cup of coffee with you. Because, Bobby never signed pro, but I did. But we've kept in touch all these years, and it's magic. It's lovely. And I had a lad called Mick Kearney rang me the other day. He played for Reading, and he lives in Reading. And then he messaged me with a few little pictures and stuff like that, because we had a night out one night where me and him got locked out of our digs.
Wow. And
we had to find somewhere to stay, so we ended up sleeping in a room together. And he always says, I'm the only man you've ever slept with, he keeps saying to me. And we have a laugh and a joke about things like that, and 50 years on, he always says, am I still the only man you're in love with, sort of thing. And so there's some wonderful memories. Wonderful. When you speak to people, they come out with all these old tales. But Mick rang me just the other week. It's great to sort of, and I have all these memories with me all the time.
And in terms of becoming a better footballer, the repetitive nature of being an apprentice, I'm sure that will, build up the elements of resilience within inside you when you go on the football pitch, trying again to get past that defender to score goals.
Yeah, I have to say, all these years on, you look back and it was harsh, and I think we all see that now. There was a harshness about it. Fortunately, I could handle harshness. I'm not a loud person. I talk a lot, but I've never been frightened of anybody. I think that's my Geordie in me. That's my upbringing. With my brother Alan, who came with me. And my upbringing is, and my mum always used to say to me, God bless her, my mum always used to say to me, the bigger they are, the harder they fall. And that, not being a big lad, but putting up with quite a bit of harsh, it was tough. Like I say, if you dropped something and you hadn't picked it up, you had to tidy it again. It was rough in those days, and we've moved on from all of that. And it's important we've moved on from all of those things. But I've always been, I think I'm an all right, so I try and be nice to people. I like to treat people the way I like to be treated myself. But I'm not frightened of anybody. In fact, sometimes my lads will say to me, oh, Dad, please don't argue, please. Because I have a little thing in me, and it's, people probably haven't seen that side of me, but I'm quite fearless, really. So I look back, yes, it didn't do me any harm. I could see one or two of my friends struggled with it. I've seen a lot of things in football that I always disagreed with. And sometimes when I disagreed with things, it teaches you to make sure you never do that. Like my first day's training at Aston Villa, we ran and ran and ran and ran till everybody couldn't run anymore. And I remember even a 15-year-old going, I'll never do that. I'll never do that to anybody. If I ever become a manager or a coach, I would never do that to anybody. So you learn. But it was a harsh way of learning, So, I think it did me no harm. But I think over the years, I've seen, and we look back now because we can reflect on how things should be and how politically correct we should be in lots of different ways. But I've been through that period where being politically correct just wasn't there, But yeah. I survived it, and because I'm quite feisty, really, and I stick up for what I believe in, and I'll not do anything that I don't want to do in my life, But if someone's telling me, but I know he's right, then I'll try. But if I think somebody's telling me to do something that's totally outrageous or wrong, I won't do it. I've never done it. People will always say, "Oh, you've been a rebel all your life, Brian." And part of my passwords on things are rebel without a cause, because that's what I am. Friends of mine just always, they call me rebel. Lots of people call me rebel. But I'm not. I'm very strong. I've got a strong head, which has never really got me into trouble. But I think people who know me know that you'll not make me do anything I don't want to do. The vast part of the work was working around the club, cleaning the boots. The dressing rooms were wood floors in those days, so we had to scrub them. We had to scrub them with brushes, but it gradually. The good thing for me was, I've seen it change over the years. The apprenticeship wasn't what I thought it was going to be. The first day I was there, we trained with the senior players, ran, like I've said. For the first month, I think, I would go back to my digs, have something to eat and go straight to bed till the next morning, sort of thing. Just absolutely shattered. You've moved into a world. And it was harsh because the senior players, there wasn't loads of money in the game in those days. So if the senior players weren't in the first team that day, they were murdered. They were really quite upset with things. And you could sense as a young lad in the dressing room, when you went in to make tea or pick stuff up off the floor, you could sense there was although they got on well in lots of ways, when it came to a match day or the Friday before the match day, when the teams would go up on the teams used to just get pinned on the dressing room wall, you could sense then that there was only 11 people happy in that dressing room, because there was no subs in those days. You didn't have substitutes. So 11 out of the 30 professionals, only 11 were in the first team. The others were in the reserve team. The others were in the intermediate team. And then there was the youth team. So there was four. Every Friday, we trained together around Aston Villa, around the club itself. We used to play killer ball, as we used to call it, because there was 50 of us in the car park with one ball. And it was it was murder. It was so basic and embarrassing. It's untrue, but that's how it was in those days. And then at 1 o'clock, we'd finish at 12. Then at 1 o'clock, the team sheets would go up. And as a young kid, you could see the animosity and the disappointment of some lads who were married with kids, who weren't in the first team, who weren't going to be getting their appearance money, who weren't going to be getting the bonus. So it was a different world, and you were in amongst that. And I did a lot of work in the dressing room. I used to be the tea boy at times. So you got that, and you could understand why on a Friday morning some people were kicking lumps out of each other in the hope they got in the first team on a Saturday. So the environment was a million miles different. And I survived it, and I enjoyed. I learned very early in my life 3 things. I used to say, look, listen, and learn, Brian. Don't necessarily comment on things. Just look, just listen, and just learn. And I took that with me into the dressing room. So when I walked into the professional dressing room, you had to be brave, because you used to get hammered as a kid. And a lot of lads wouldn't go in and pick kit up, or wouldn't go in and pick the boots up. But I would go and I would do the tea. But you heard a lot of harshness in there. It was a big, cruel world in those days. And a lot of the lads were really tough lads, and some of the big boys used to mess. There's a fella called George Curtis, who everybody was absolutely terrified of. I mean, George was rough as could be. And nobody, but the players used to cut his socks up and things like that. And you'd go in and George would pick his socks up, and you could see he was going to strangle somebody if he found out who it was. And I, as a kid, would see this, you could see this. And then you'd see some of the lads hiding behind newspapers laughing because, but they did it. They always picked on the toughest person, and yet the toughest person would beat somebody up or hang them on. George used to hang people on the hangers, just get them by the back of his clothes and find out who it was who cut his socks up. You saw all sorts of things going on. It was brilliant. I love it. I personally loved it. I loved that. There was a harshness, but it was a growing up thing, and it was how things were in those days, and it was mega competitive. because only 11 people played on the first team on a Saturday. There wasn't a squad of 18 and 7 subs. There wasn't even one sub in those days. In fact, when you were injured, you used to have to play on the left wing. You know, you couldn't come off the pitch. I mean, if you recall, if you look at, say, Leeds United Cup finals over the year, I remember seeing the centre forward of Leeds in the FA Cup final. I can't quite think what his name is now, but he's playing with his arm in a sling. You know, the last 15 minutes because he's broke his arm but he can't come off. So and if it's an FA Cup final and you watch him, he's playing with his arm in a sling like this, and because you couldn't come off the pitch. So in those days, if you got injured, you had to play on the left wing and do whatever you could. So it was crazy. You know, you look back over the years how football has developed and how physiotherapy and the treatment of players and the well-being of players and the training facilities and the training regimes and how you train. It was just all thrown together back in those days. And it wasn't thrown together with any sort of scientific sort of theory at all. It was basically the tough survived and the weaker didn't survive many things. I wasn't tough in terms of having a fight or anything, but I was tough mentally. And there was a lot of tough mental players who you just learned off. But I used to try and take everything in because, as I've said, it just was so different to how it is today. And even in my time as a manager, as I developed later on, changed completely. You know, we were beginning to get onto the diet and the sports science and all that sort of thing. But I've not witnessed in how in this real thorough as it stuff is now, but managed to get to the point where we were having fitness coaches and things like that coming into it as I got older in the game. But initially it was, my word, you know, you had to be a tough person or a strong person to survive in football back in the 60s and 70s.
The element of physicality is really dissipated within the modern game compared to when you played. And you see specific examples like Jack Grealish, who went out on loan to Notts County to really build up and play against really strong physical players in the lower leagues. So do you believe, I pick out examples like Ravel Morrison, who's a great young player, as was in the Man U Academy, but has struggled due to his attitude. So do you believe that element of physicality that's not there anymore, has that restricted players' development? Or is it that because there's this new modern way of playing that clubs are really focused on that?
It's a completely different, I mean, the biggest thing for me is mentality. You know, I mean, you mentioned Jack there. I can't proclaim to know Jack overly well. I know him well enough to say hello. He's always pleasant to me. I'm always pleasant to him. We seem to get on okay. But it's Jack's mentality that wins him through. I've worked with players. I've played with young players. I've managed players who, on the training ground, are different class. Stick them in front of 20,000 people and they fall apart. So. You know, outside of having talent, you have to have the mentality to perform at the highest level. I've worked in the Premier League as a manager. As a manager, so it's easier for me to talk as a manager. As a manager, I've worked in the Premier League, the Championship, Division 1, Division 2, National League as it is now, National League. So I've worked at 6 levels of football. And as each level, as you come down, some of the players in the non-league scene are actually really talented. But you stick 500 people in front of them and it's like a complete, you know, they don't do the sort of things they do on the training ground for you. So, you know, it's a mix of everything. It's a mix of having the ability, yes, without a doubt. But ability with the wrong mentality is probably the worst ingredients you could have. You know, having a certain amount of ability, but a great mentality can actually see you through. But ability with no mentality of it is probably the worst. Is probably the worst of all the evils. So some of these players, and you mentioned a lad who I don't know personally, so I'm not going to comment about him as an individual. But I would think Jack's biggest strength is his mentality, his desire, his willingness, his ability to handle difficult situations, ability to walk out in front of a crowd and here I am, it's me, I'm going to play. I think that was my biggest strength. Love big crowds, love to play. And what people don't see is the side of you as a person. And I can't talk about Jack, but I can talk about myself. As a young footballer, every night of the week when I went to bed, this would go around about what I was going to do, what I was going to try and do. If I'd seen a football player do something that I thought was great, I'm going to try that. And you're always thinking about what you want to do, what you want to achieve, where you want to go. And the ones who haven't got that are the ones who despite can turn up and keep the ball up 50 times, flick it over their head without a crowd being there. They're the ones who'll struggle. So it's a mix. It's a mix of lots of things. But you have to have the desire and you have to have the mentality to handle criticism of crowds. If they're booing you or shouting at you, you have to handle the other side of it where they're absolutely praising you for everything. And you have to be able to keep this levelness. So the being a football player is a great living. It's a wonderful thing for lots of people. But the best players have lots of things. They've got lots of assets. Not only can they play, not only can they run, but they look after themselves. They can handle a big crowd at any time, and they thrive on massive situations.
Now, you came around the first team, and when you started to come into the first team, Villa suffered relegation. So do you think that going through that process of trying to get back up to the higher leagues, was that the revival of Aston Villa and the club itself, and you potentially changed your mentality to cope with that situation and consequently became a better cohesive unit?
Yeah, I think my first season as an apprentice, the club got relegated to the third division for the first time in their history. The third tier of football was the first division, second division, third division. And it was a really tough period because the team were doing poor. Within 6 months, my first manager, Tommy Doherty, had lost his job. And he was, he's great fun, Tommy. He's really good to me. Arthur Cox worked for him, who stayed in football for many years afterwards. So yes, I witnessed a really tough period in the game. And as I've said, I because I went into that dressing room as a 15-year-old kid, I could see the disappointment in players, and I watched different players whose mentality you could see were not really reveling in not really being strong enough to deal with it. Others who could, but were surrounded by lots of others who really weren't that happy in the situation. So I got used to seeing how a dressing room, an unhappy dressing room, I would say, ticked over. So I saw, people like Ray Graydon, tremendous professional, Bruce Rioch, tremendous professional, Jeff Bowden, tremendous professional, mixed in with a lot of lads who weren't as happy because A, they weren't in the team, B, if they were in the team, they weren't quite good enough to keep the team in that division. And I very quickly saw a side of football which you need to recognise as you grow older. The next season, when they began to pull themselves together, they were competitive in the third division for one season. Then the next season, they got promoted with Vic Crow in charge. And then I went through this, 10-year period where Aston Villa went from winning the old third division to winning the first division in 10 years. I mean, it's incredible, so I was part of that team leading up to the last year. I wasn't part of the team that won the league, and I don't pretend to be. But that 10-year period I played around the club at first team level, we went from the third division to the second division, from the second division to the first division, from the first division to playing in Europe, to winning 2 League Cup finals, to eventually setting up a team which Ron Saunders got together, which won the Division 1 itself. So it was an incredible 10-year period. And I've talked to one or two people from the hierarchy over the years about momentum, because I maintain that's That's the most incredible momentum I've ever seen in my life. Witnessing a dressing room from 1969-70 to knowing the dressing room in the early 80s, where, you know, McNaught, Evans, Mortimer, Morley, Swain, you know, this incredible team put together by Ron Saunders, winning the English First Division. Sadly, I was injured that year and never played, but Gary Shaw stepped in and was remarkable. So I witnessed a 10-year period in my life where I learned an unbelievable amount about the dressing room, about the manager, about his organisation, about discipline, about building a team and having different types of players to play in different positions, but building a team that joins together and plays well. And Ron Saunders was incredible. Ron Saunders built 3 teams in 5 years. You know, one to get back to the First Division, one that won 2 League Cup finals in that period, and one which eventually won the First Division. In a 3-year period, he tweaked his team every other year to create this. And in my management times, I've tried to almost copy the type of teams he would put together, you know, with certain players in certain positions, certain players who match with each other. So, I learned an awful lot in that period, and seeing the club and this incredible momentum it got going over this. You know, in the 3rd division, there was like, I seeing one of the greatest games. It was one of the greatest games. I remember watching Villa versus Bournemouth in the 3rd division with 50-odd thousand people there. You know, and it's just incredible. You know, all standing up and everything, and that, you know, an incredible game with incredible fans. And I'm watching a 3rd division football club with more often than not 40 to 50,000 people watching them play. So, you know, you've witnessed something which is just incredible in football terms. Couldn't happen today. It just wouldn't happen. You can't build a team that quickly in modern day stuff. But it was an incredible period to be part of the club as a football player in. So I've been, again, blessed to have come through that and to have seen that and to have witnessed it. And the older people, the older Villa fans, they would have to say to you, you know, if there was a 10-year period that you can't believe in many respects, it's like climbing from the 3rd division to winning the European Cup in 12 years, I think it was. That's just a remarkable experience to have seen, to have witnessed, to have played in at certain times. So, you know, that's a period of my life that I will always reflect on and say that it was brilliant.
What was it about Ron Saunders that brought the best out of the players at Aston Villa? Was it certain training methods that really utilised the players well?
I think we were frightened of him. he was hard as nails. I mean, the number of times he used to threaten to beat me up, it was untrue. You know, he didn't stand any messing around at all. You know, I bet if you go back in time, it wasn't a party club, but you know, in those days, team bonding was about going out on a Tuesday night, all the lads together, and we were encouraged to do it. We are encouraged to have team bonding sessions, and you know, like I said, this is a different world. It's like 40 years ago, you know, and it's not sports science. There wasn't any sports science in those days. We used to have steak and chips before we played on a match day. You know, that's we go to the hotel. Everybody was dead excited, and I, as a kid, was excited because we were getting steak. I mean, I didn't have steak in my digs. I used to have beans on toast with cheese on, or cheese on toast with beans on, off Mrs. Mallard. That was my stock food. So you used to look for, well, what happened to steak today? You know, and like, so you're in an era of football where there was a drinking sort of mentality. Go out with your lads and have a drink and enjoy yourselves and make sure you're a good team on Saturday. When Ron Saunders walked in, the first thing he said was, right, you're in every day. You don't get days off. A day off with me, you come in at 9 o'clock in the morning and you leave at 10 o'clock in the morning. And he used to do that. So on a Wednesday, which was because basically you went out on a Tuesday night and after that you wouldn't go out. He would make sure that on a Tuesday night you would stay in, because Wednesday morning for 1 hour you used to run and jump and train like nobody, prisoner. So he had this thing. He found this way of working people to the point that you actually started more looking after yourself better off the pitch. He introduced a fitness coach, which really wasn't. I mean, it's so far ahead of its time. But he was a weightlifter, you know. So the lads used to spend it. I wouldn't do it. I refused to lift weights. I didn't like doing weights, but but a lot of the lads used to enjoy toning themselves up a little bit. I'd never done weights. It never was my thing at all. But he made sure we worked hard. He made sure we trained hard. He made sure we looked after ourselves. Tony Morley will tell you more than anybody else, and Gary showing them. Ron would always walk past you and just put his face near to you to smell if there was any beer smell on you or anything like that, you know, and he would know if you'd been out the night before, and he would just nail you there and then. He had he was brilliant. As a person, Ron and I clashed so many times it was untrue because of my mentality over things, and he was a stickler for all sorts of things, which some of them were brilliant, but some of them I didn't like. But Ron and I didn't really get on very well. But did I respect him? Yes, because he brought an unbelievable discipline to the club. He brought in, along with Tony Barton, a lot of really good players. His team and his work ethic were incredible. But he was a hard man to get to like. He certainly didn't get on overly well with me. But I think when I look back on it, I think that was his way of trying to get the best out of me. He always felt that if he wound me up a little bit, I would play better. And Tony Morley was the same. And I know Tony, he always used to wind Tony Morley up, and he always used to wind Gary Shaw up. But your Des Bremners and your Dennis Mortimers and your Alan Evans and Ken McNaught, who he knew were like really solid, straightforward, 100%, you know, I'm going to give you everything, gaffer sort of thing. He was all right with them. But anybody who had a little bit of flair or talent or a little bit awkward, which I definitely was awkward, he wouldn't give you an inch. So he was, again, his man management was brilliant. And at the time I hated it. But there comes a period in your life where you realise that, God, he was clever. He knew how to make me play on a Saturday. You know, he'd call me in on a Friday and say, oh, I'm thinking about leaving you out tomorrow. And I'd go, what? Yeah. Well, we've got a few young lads who are better than you now. And I used to walk out his room and I was like fuming. But then I look back and I know now that he was just winding me up. But he used to do that all the time. And I'd like go, but it like motivated me to make it. I'll show him tomorrow. You just watch this sort of thing, but on a regular basis. And he'd do the same with Tony Morley. I don't want you dribbling past too many people now. Tony would like, that's what he did. That's what he was brilliant at. But he was just winding him up to make him play. So he was an incredible. So that's the first time I sort of got into the mind game side of things, you know, and treating people in a way that you felt you needed to get the best out of them. Not as much as him. I wouldn't have gone any deep as him.
And his view on nutrition and sports science, do you think that the fact that he was a pioneer within football, did that cause a domino effect at all in terms of other clubs thinking, okay, this is how to create a successful squad, let's replicate that? And was that a domino effect at all?
Well, we went from one extreme to the other with food because, you know, within no time at all, we were having like, there was all sorts of things introduced, but we weren't having steak and chips and things like that anymore. You know, we just have a drink and a certain type of energy drink and stuff. I guess I'm not saying he was a pioneer because I wasn't at other clubs at the time, but it was, you know, and I listened. Occasionally I listen to the commentary of the 77 Everton games in the final. And you listen to the commentator saying, "Oh, it's extra time now. Aston Villa are the fittest team in the league. You watch them; they're really known for their fitness." So he created this. People were talking about him then about how fit we were, but basically it made us live our lifestyle different. He made us look after. He certainly let us have at the right time after a game on a Saturday. You know, he'd pass down a can of beer to anybody and everybody, saying, right, this is the time, relax now. But through the week, he wouldn't have any of it. So he just moved on. You know, we just beginning to realize that, you know, there were certain things that went on in the 60s and the early 70s that really weren't helping you be a footballer. And he just realized that. So, you know, we all thank them for that. I know that the European Cup winning team and the League Cup winning lads, Dennis and all them, you know, they worshipped Ron or worshipped him. And I respected him, but he and I never got on. So, you know, that'll never change, unfortunately. I mean, I did say sorry to him once, and he just walked away from me. So, so I think I had upset him enough. So, but yeah, it's just another thing in life. But he was a brilliant man, I have to say.
You were at Aston Villa as a player from 1971 to 1980, and when you tried to make the move to Blues, you found that injury, and of course, that's when you were forced to retire. So, just looking back at those years at Aston Villa, do you regret anything you did? Did you wish that you would have gone and won more caps for the club or won more trophies?
Yeah, well, it would be nice to have been capped more, but you know, after playing my first game for England, I was injured the next season. Bear in mind, in those days, the really only international games were the home internationals at the end of each season, and there was like a build-up to the World Cup, or the international games were few and far between in those days. So I was injured at a period after playing in the England team, which really gave people like Trevor Francis and Tony Woodcock the opportunity to get into the side. They were pretty much the type of rivals I had. And Trevor was an incredible player. But I played for England before Trevor did, you know, so I was a little notch ahead of him. But then when I got injured, Trevor got into the team. And in all fairness, there wasn't enough internationals in those days. They didn't have big squads. You didn't have big get-togethers. So once you nailed your sort of yourself to the team, it was very difficult to oust players in those days. So I was a little bit unfortunate. The season after that, I remember Andy Gray, John Dean, and myself. I think we scored 70, nearly 80 goals between us. And I think that was probably the one point I remember thinking, right, I'm going to be in the England squad again now after this season. Andy and myself and Dixie, we the 77 year, we had a great team, and we played unbelievably well. I think we finished fourth in the league, and we won the League Cup again. I think I'd scored 24 goals, I think it was. But I never got in the England team again. So to be honest, I've never felt gutted about it. I just respected the fact that Trevor had got in there. And in all fairness, those days there wasn't the internet. I think, you know, like the modern, and forgive me, but you know, you're in this modern era where you don't realize what it was like in the 70s. It was a completely different world. Football was a completely different game. And whereas today there are lots of friendlies, they get-togethers, the manager can look at different players and people get England caps. Back in my day, the England team virtually picked itself. If someone was in that team, they were in that team. There wasn't friendly games. You didn't have get-togethers through the season or anything like that. At the end of the season, there was the home internationals, and that was pretty much it. So I never felt. I just felt that I know Trevor Francis. I've known Trevor all my playing days. He was an incredible player, and he was just ahead of me. So you know that's I don't look at it any other way than that. Except the fact that I got in there before him. So you know, if I hadn't had injuries, I might have stayed in there for some time.
Regarding your playing honours and your managerial honours, which one do you honour personally the most?
I'd like to think I was destined to be a football player. That's what I mean. I think that's what I wanted to be from the age of 12-year-old. From the day I went to, my dad used to play in the band. So I remember going to Middlesbrough. The first football match I ever went to, I went to Middlesbrough. My dad was marching on the pitch at half time, playing in the band. And Middlesbrough played Liverpool. And Roger Hunt played for Liverpool. And I remember being spellbound by Roger Hunt, who was an England international. And I remember going home. I remember saying to my dad, "I'm going to be a footballer, Dad. I want to be like Roger Hunt. I want to play football. I want to play it like Ayson Park." And I was a tiny little dot. And I went in carrying one of the band bags for my dad, like, you know, so I was carrying a little instrument and stood on on one of the big cases so as I could see over the fence. But it just hooked me. I knew then I wanted to be. I mean, I was always playing football every day of my life. But I remember then that made me want to be a footballer. And I was fortunate to be a footballer, and I worked hard to be a footballer. Football coaching and football management, that was a different league for me. You know, I mean, the fact that I got injured at 25, the fact that at 27 I was well and truly finished. I went to work in a printing company for 3 months. I went to work with a fellow called Stan Buggins, who used to produce the club programme. I'm trying to think what it's called, Highfield Press, I think it was called. I hated it. I went in and I was like, you know, it's just like a different world. It's like the land time forgot. I was like, what am I doing here? This is not me. Crikey. I hated it. I spent 2 months and I never learned. 2 months I didn't learn one thing. So I spent 2 months working for Stan, and then I went to him and just said, "I'm sorry, mate. Look, I mean, he's a massive Villa fan, wonderful, wonderful man, lovely friend of the players and everything. I just said, I can't do this. I'm sorry, but I know you're offering me a job for life, but I can't do it." So I packed in, went home and went down to Villa Park and went into the club shop and asked if I could do anything for them. I said, "Is there anything I could do? I'd like, you know, if I can help you with anything." So they said, "Oh yeah, you can deliver some lottery tickets and scratch cards to the pubs and the clubs." I went, "Yeah, of course I will." So they gave me a little mini metro with Aston Villa written all over it in claret and blue. And I used to go around the pubs and the clubs delivering lottery tickets to off licenses. I'd go in a pub at lunchtime and swap the scratch cards over. And all the Villa fans are going, "What are you doing in here, Brian?" I said, "I'm swapping the cards over. I'm working for the club now in the shop." And they used to laugh at me. They used to go, "What are you doing that for?" I said, "Well, because I like football. I just want to be in football. That's all I want to do." Then I worked behind the counter on a match day, selling scarves and things like that. Then Ron Saunders left. And he took Keith Leonard with him to Birmingham City. And Tony Barton was given the job. And Tony just, so I saw me, by chance, walked past Tony down the ground in the car park. He went, "Hi, Brian, you're right." I said, "Yeah, I'm fine, thanks." He said, "You want to look after the youth coach for a few weeks for me, would you?" I went, "Yeah, of course I will." So all of a sudden, I became the youth coach. He said, "If you're any good at it, I'll give you the job." So fate, my fate, I knew I had to be at Aston Villa. I knew I had to work in football. So I went all of a sudden from working in the club shop, delivering the lottery tickets and scratch cards around. I used to sit in people's houses at the night time. But I used to take me that long because we'd talk all night, you know, like I'm swapping so-and-so's, he's got £50 worth of lottery tickets, but we spent all night talking and then I'd hardly get any work done. So my little mini metro. But then I saw Tony and he said, "Well, why don't you try, can you look after the youth team?" So I did, and I never looked back. And I found very quickly that I was actually I got on really well with the young lads, the players. And, you know, I had people like Tony DeRigo and Tony Daly and Mark Burke and David Norton and Darren Bradley. There was lots of lads went on to play senior football, and I enjoyed it. And so all of a sudden I became a football coach. And then I was obviously self-taught. And then I went on my coaching badges as time went by, became a fully qualified coach. I never looked back. So I've been in it, but by chance I became a coach, and something I'd never thought of. But I became a coach because I bumped into Tony on the car park, and that was brilliant.
And you've been a one-man band in terms of your playing days. You're Aston Villa throughout your playing days, but you've managed so many clubs during your managerial career. How important was it for you? Because before you came to Villa, you managed a few clubs, and after Villa, you managed even more clubs. How important was it for you to gain experience all over the UK and abroad to really hone your managerial skills?
I think for me, again, you know, my strengths are that I'm headstrong, but it's also my biggest weakness as well. You know, if I don't like something, I tell somebody, and if I don't like it, sometimes I end up just going, right, that's it, I've had enough, and off I go. And I've done that a few times in football. So my strength, that I'm not frightened to stand up for myself or say what I want or do what I want, and is really important to me. But it's also been my biggest sort of problem at times as well. But I'm very grateful to people like Bruce Rioch, who gave me my first full-time job. I mean, I was youth coach at Villa, but that was a little bit by default, and I'd never really planned for that. But when I went to Middlesbrough to work for Bruce as the youth team coach, that's where I wanted to become a football manager. He was incredible. Bruce was a unbelievably 100% non-stop workaholic, and he put that into that's the one thing he changed more than anything about me. We went to football matches every night when we were up there. When I was at Middlesbrough, we'd go to Scotland on a Friday night. If there was one football match on a Friday night, we would go to it. And it was always either Stockport were one of the clubs. We used to go from Middlesbrough to over the M62 in winter time. It was foggy, it was snowing, and we used to sit there going, what are we going to this game for? Well, it's the only game on, so we're going to watch it, we're going to learn. And he used to take me everywhere, and we worked our socks off with Colin Todd as well. So he was brilliant. I love Bruce, and to this day I love Bruce Rioch. He was brilliant to me, but he taught me so many things about leading from the front, setting an example, discipline, making sure you make the rules out, make sure every player that plays for you knows exactly what you want, when you want it, how you want it. And in the end, I got to the point with Bruce that he took Middlesbrough from the third division to the third division, second division, third division in 3 years. We'd gone up straight away, and I worked with him and Colin Todd. And I knew then that I had to be a football manager. And I remember, out of respect, I went in to speak. I said, Bruce, I need to talk to you. I'm going to look for another job. And he went, okay, that's fine. I said, but I can't work for you in this job, knowing that I can walk out on you anytime. So what I'll do, I'll give you 3 weeks notice. You can appoint somebody else, and that way I know I've left with a straight face, and I'm looking you straight in the eye, and I know I'm going to leave, and I know I'm doing it the right way, the way I want to do it. I wasn't going to turn up one day and say, I'm off now, I've got a job somewhere else. That's how much respect I had for him. So I walked out of Middlesbrough without a job. You know, again, that's just my mentality. This is Brian Little, you know, the silly man, married at the time with 2 kids sort of thing, going home saying, right, I haven't got a job now, you know, I've packed in. And, you know, the times I did that, I've done that more than once in my life. But I got offered the Darlington job, who were bottom of the 4th division, who hadn't, in February, end of February, I got offered the job. They were bottom of the 4th division. They hadn't won a home game all season. And I got offered the job till the end of the season. And I went, yeah, of course I'll do it. I actually got offered the job for 3 games once. The chairman said, you got it for 3 games. I went, no, I'm off. And I walked out. Another one of the directors ran down the stairs and pulled me back and said, come on, back up here. So I went back up, and they said, right, you can have it till the end of the season. So I did it. We got relegated. I didn't work. It didn't work. But I'd done enough in that time to make them think this is the right person for the job. So I remember I sacked 16 players were out of contract, out to 19, and I released them all in 1 hour. The first one took 40 minutes to talk. It took me 40 minutes with the first one. I spoke to the first one for 40 minutes, and then I thought, why am I doing this? Because I'm going to release them all. So I just released the other 19 in 19 minutes. So in 1 hour, I've released 20 players, and then set about trying to build a team at Darlington. And unfortunately, I won 2 championships, two years in a row. But it's not. I'm not being clever saying that I did that in 1 hour, but it was just, you had to be strong. And the lad I talked to for 40 minutes was the one who was more disappointed when he walked out the room, because you're like trying to sort of say, I'm sorry, I did this, I did that. And And in the end, the lads knew they were leaving. So I just shook their hands and went, listen, thanks very much indeed. Good luck with you the rest of your career. I hope it works out for you. And those were the ones who were going, well, thanks, Gaffer, that's fine. I'll get on with it. All the best. Whereas the one I kept for 40 minutes, like, I think he was more gutted because you trying to make up little excuses. So that taught me something about being straight and honest and right to the point. But it worked for me. And I won 2 championships. And then I went from there, from strength to strength in football. Then then little things about it turned against me. But Darlington was a fantastic place for me to work. We had a great, we got together a great bunch of players. Again, it was based on a Ron Saunders team with strong centre-backs, unbelievably athletic midfield players, but with somebody who could pass the ball in the middle of the park, and a couple of strikers who could win you games. So, a lot of Ron Saunders was beginning to come out in me in that period then, and that's when I realised Bruce had tuned me into what I wanted to be. But I remember most of my teams were all based on a Ron Saunders attitude and application and dedication, organisation. So, I just went on from there.
And you say that you're a good family man, you're a good communicator, you like talking to people, you're resilient on and off the field. So when it came to football management, was this just about honing all the different skills you learned throughout your life and just implementing them within each job you did?
Yeah, the biggest thing is to treat people the way you like to be treated yourself. That's always been my motto. Because, as I've said, being brought up in that 60s environment, 70s environment where the manager had to be harsh, the manager had to be tough, the manager had to, walk out and tell somebody to get lost, go over there and train with the reserves today and things like that. It was awful. So you just, all of those things. So my biggest single thing was always to treat people the way I like to be treated myself. But to be organised, to be ready things like, preparing and being prepared for what might happen. So, before a game, I think I would always, look at the scenario, look at what the chances were, were we going to win, were we going to lose? If we lose, depending on what position you are in the league, being ready for the questions after the game. So I always say, and I used to say to Alan and John Gregory, especially, so I knew wanted to be a manager, just be able to look around the corner before you go around the corner, I used to say, because if in your mind you've got the scenarios, this could happen or that could happen, be ready for both of them. Don't just be so hell bent on, well, we're going to win this game, so I'll be laughing and joking with the press afterwards. You got to be ready for, what might happen if he's sent off, what might happen if this goes wrong, what might happen if that happens. So it's all about being aware and being ready and as I've said, being able to see around the corner before you get there, so you don't get smacked in the face, sort of thing, so you don't walk into something which you don't want. But football has this unbelievable way of throwing up things that you can't help, and some of them are very tough to handle. So, you have to be prepared for the unexpected sometimes, and some of the unexpected things are really tough to deal with, so to speak. But trying to be as organised and disciplined, trying not to waste your time sitting just daydreaming, look at the scenarios, think of all the scenarios, and be ready for as many good or bad outcomes as you possibly can be, because you have to look after yourself.
I was looking through the clubs you've managed and the honours that you've won as a manager, and I wanted to really end this interview on a high point. And surely the pinnacle of your management career was winning the League Cup with Aston Villa. So how did you compile a squad which was able to go through those rounds successively, get to the final and win? What was the mentality you had during that time? What did you teach the players to conduct themselves on the pitch? How did that all come together?
I knew we'd hit on something. We survived the season before on the last game of the season. We were clear. We needed it. We needed 1 point from the last game of the season before at Norwich. We scored in the first minute of the game. Crystal Palace, I think, were the team that needed to what could have caught us with Gareth Southgate in, and I knew I was interested in Gareth. But they were 3-0 down at half time at Newcastle, so pretty much we were safe in not as much pressure as the lads had been under last season. But it was still a pressure situation. But I already knew what I wanted to do. Going to that Norwich game, like I said, I would sleep and think about games and think about. So I'd already in my head had all the scenarios ready for the Norwich thing. We could have got relegated, although it was going to be a slim chance. But what I was going to do when we stayed up and what the plans were, within no time at all, we went out, we signed Southgate, we signed Mark Draper, we signed Sabo Milosevic. And those were the three key things. But obviously the difficulty was planning that. I'd already had conversations, and I knew Dean Saunders and Dalian Atkinson, God bless them. I knew their agent had things fixed up for them to go off to Fenerbahce and what's the other club? Anyway, to go off to abroad. So I knew that was set up, and I needed to give Dwight York license to be the number one striker. I also needed to strengthen the midfield with Draper, who I knew about. I wanted Gareth in at the club. And along with Gary Charles and Tommy Johnson and Ian Taylor, who I'd signed earlier, I knew I was changing 60% of the team. But I believed in Bosnich. I believed in Paul McGrath. I believed in Andy Townsend. And I knew they were the right sort to be in. And again, similarity in many respects to the current situation. 3 or 4 players make such a difference to a group. If you recognise where it needs strengthening, we had good players. Dwight needed to be given his licenses to be the best striker at the club. Dino and Dalian were always strong characters, and I would always have made him feel a little bit inferior because of their mentality, and so I needed to do that. I think that team that year, the 95-96 team, was one of the best teams I've either played for or worked with. They got on really well together. York and Milosevic were a fantastic partnership. McGrath, Hugo, God bless them, and Gareth were incredible. I didn't have to tell them how to defend. I just to say to them, just make sure they don't score goals, lads, and they would out and go. I mean, you don't tell. I couldn't tell Paul McGrath how to backheel a flick 50 yards. He's the only fella I've ever seen backheel a ball 50 yards. I mean, and he just an incredible character. Wonderfully humble person, and Gareth just sensed danger. You can't tell people how to sense danger. He was naturally good at it. Bosnich was infectious in a great way, in many ways. He's an absolute lunatic. I mean, I love him to bits, Bozzy. But he was crackers. We used to sit laughing at him so many times because he'd be in his own little world. And he would be saying, "What's happening today, Buzz?" He said, "They're not scoring against me today. Nobody can score past me today. I'm going to be incredible." And we used to just laugh. But I tell you what, then he'd watching me, he'd be jumping in the top corner, pulling him out the top corner. Some days he just felt immense. That was his character. Some days he totally believed in. Some days there were days when he said, "There's nobody going to score past me today. Nobody." And you believed him. And he had that mentality. He could be a little bit down, but when he was up and hyped, you just knew you got the best goalkeeper in the world. And he used to tell everybody that he was the best goalkeeper in the world. It was great. I loved him. Then you had some modesty. Charlo was a modest lad. Alan Wright was a modest lad, but great energy and athleticism and so unpredictable, because everybody thought, stick the ball at the far post and out jump Alan Wright. No, it didn't matter whether he's 5'2". He could jump like a salmon. He was brilliant. So in this Townsend, there was a driving force in the middle of the field. They were a great team. They really were an unbelievable team together. Ian Taylor, unbelievable athlete. Like when I look at Ron Saunders had Des Bremner or Frank Carradus. I brought in Ian Taylor to replicate that type of a player. Somebody who could run from box to box for 90 minutes non-stop. Gordon Cowan. So I bring in Draper. I'm not saying Draper was as good as Gordon, but a great passer of the ball. Great, Mortimer, Andy Townsend, great captains. Wonderful. So that and again, without, but I think Andy Gray, Brian Little, Peter Wibb, Gary Shaw. I had Milosevic and York. The goal scorers. Then I had the defenders. I mean, you talk Alan Evans and Ken McNaught, McGrath and Eggy Jorgen Southgate. I mean, you could say they're every bit as good as the team that won that European Cup in terms of player. So I'd built a Ron Saunders team. That's what I'd built. I'd replicated it with different players with different names, and you could argue all day who was better than who. Was Cowan's better than Draper? Was Mortimer better than Townsend? Was McGrath better than Alan Evans and Ken McNaught? You could argue all day. Was York as good as Gary Shaw? Of course, you could argue all day. But it was a Ron Saunders team. I'd built and replicated in a different era a Ron Saunders team. And that's what I'm proud of more than anything else. Yes, we finished fourth in the Premier League. Yes, we won the League Cup. Yes, we got to the quarter-final, the semi-final of the FA Cup. But the biggest thing for me was I'd replicated something from somebody who I respected, who I didn't like, but I respected. And I did it my way, but I did it trying to look at his team and put together a Villa team that I thought might and could have gone on, and probably should have gone on, and should have kicked on, and should have gone further. But like Ron left when you didn't expect him to leave, and of course Daft Lad here left when he didn't expect to leave as well. I just got angry one day and went, right, I said, I'm knocking on Doug's door. That's it. I'm finished. I've had enough. Silly boy, but that's just life, isn't it? But I loved it. I loved it. I never fell out with the club. But I'm proud of replicating that type of a team, and I love each and every one of those players. We've lost a couple, which has been devastating. But I've done it. I've been there, and I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I still enjoy going to Villa Park today because it gives me the opportunity to talk forever and ever and ever.
Brian, you've been such a fantastic guest. Your stories are so insightful, and I just want to thank you for coming on today. I really appreciate it.
Brilliant. I'm glad I learned how to do this. I was dead frightened thinking I'll not be able to do this Zoom thing, but I found you. Pleasure. Thank you very much indeed.
I hope you guys have enjoyed it too. Make sure you leave a like on the video, subscribe to our channel, but most importantly, stay safe, stay well, and up the Villa.
I keep being too caught up by all my demons, lost without that light.